It's good to be with the DLD family. It's exciting to be back. Thank you for having me. Thank you for being so flexible. 2 years ago, I had my third DLD presentation, but it was special because I was presenting a little work of art that I'm going to share with you today, 2 years later. It's almost like showing a sketch a while ago, and then now I will show you something which has moved a little bit from sketch into a kind of, let's say, a sort of mechanistic period. But let me just, the few of you that I haven't met before, which is sort of all of you. Oh, I have a clicker here. Let me just show you a little bit of what I do normally. Can you see this picture? This is the Turbine Hall at the Tate, and it's actually exactly 10 years ago. So we are celebrating that 10 years ago we kickstarted the weather project, which was about experiential questions. How do we feel? How do we know what we feel? And what does it mean to know that we are here? And are we actually here? Are we at the Truman Show? Do you remember? That's also 10 years ago, the Truman Show. So are we now? Are we on the sort of Truman side? Are we on the, the kind of camera side? So this project at the Tate Modern was about, touching people. And I moved on with that. This is Glacial Ice from Iceland being shown in Berlin. It was at PS1 here in New York last year. If we can't send everybody up to the glaciers, we might as well just take the glaciers down to where people are. And holding hands with a glacier is not too bad, because you go, oh, this is glacier, I know how it looks. But once you touch it, it's actually striking, because it's a different thing to touch physically than to think about touching physically, right? So you think the two are actually connected, but thinking about something is over here, but doing something is over here. And the distance between the two is, as you all know, is actually bigger than we think, and we shouldn't take that for granted. So this bridge between thinking of something is a project here in Stockholm, dying the river called the Strömmen in Stockholm. This is the parliament in Stockholm, right at the center. Sort of, what is the river doing in Stockholm? And let me not go into that, but obviously it's about public space, Sweden, resourcefulness, powerness, and so on, and then sort of toxic ideas and so on, sort of non-announced intervention. This was very well announced. This was also in New York 6 years ago, the Waterfalls. And as you know, looking at a space, you sometimes wonder, oh my God, that's a big space. How far away is it? How far away is the Brooklyn Bridge? How tall it is? Looking at falling water, you can see if it falls slow, it's high and far away. If it falls fast, it's a small waterfall close by, right? So it's a way of measuring space, and if space has depth, there is also space to meet. You can't meet another person if a space doesn't have a certain depth. A two-dimensional image doesn't allow for you to contact somebody. So it's a long story made very short. Right, so these are the things I work on. Here, a rainbow on the roof of a museum in Denmark. It's a sort of a glass ring in which you can walk, so walking in the rainbow. It's the walking and not the rain and the rainbow. If you don't walk, if you don't move, nothing changes. Right. So this was like a short introduction to the things that I normally do. And I've been lucky to take some of these ideas about how do we touch each other and how does that feel? What does it feel to be sort of not in the Truman Show but be on the other side? Is reality relative? And how do we translate our thinking into doing? Which is what started me doing the project, which Steffi asked me to sort of share at the very first model, where this was a laser sinter model, a 3D print, 2 years ago. Last week, Bloomberg announced that he was donating $5 million to this. So in the years from Steffi's first presentation in Munich up until now, we sold 200,000 of those, 220,000 of those. 2/3 of those were sold in places, and this is what this is about, where there is no access to energy. And the 1/3 we sold here, for instance, in New York, up at the MoMA shop, or online, or in Europe at DLD. And the money from that profit, selling it at $30 approximately, went into bringing them to the marketplaces in rural Africa, for instance, selling them for a price that would compete with kerosene or petroleum. So the campaign inside of this, we call the Kill Kerosene campaign, meaning that the price point of this in rural Africa is roughly the price that makes it compatible with petroleum. So this means it's not an aid project, It's a solar project, which is about having access to this, which is energy, power, and the business model is based on how do we kick the oil industry out of rural Africa. So let me just backtrack a little bit. Have a look at this. It's a work of art, right? You saw the other works of art. So how does this feel in your hand? It feels like I go out in the sun and I charge my little decentralized power station. I have access to energy. I am embodying energy. This is my energy, and this is what I need to liberate myself from being off the electrical grid. By doing so, I have access to energy which is then suddenly not expensive. Toxic fumes from petroleum, which is the second highest death rate after car accidents in rural Africa. So respiratory disease control is called. And of course, it's all about education, keeping your little kiosk or your business open a little bit longer. And it's also about introducing the dialogue about what is alternative energy access say about the climate. So the main narrative here is, how does it feel to hold power? And is the relationship between charging your little son and charging yourself? Liberating yourself or empowering yourself. And with that story, we have actually succeeded now bringing the little son into different networks in 8, just since last week, 9 countries in rural Africa, where we have all kinds of different relationships with combinations of private sector and NGOs, and projects where street vendor organizations, women associations, networks, all sort of market-based but social business powered, and so on. And we're still looking for new retail models, and with the sort of injection of energy, if you would say that we just got from Bloomberg Philanthropies last week, we're going to scale our ambition in rural Africa. See, now these are the smaller, sort of the smaller stories. I'm going to have to ask you to help me with one thing. I told them to bring a few up here. See, why don't you take some yourself, right? You can, of course, also go online and buy it and all of that. But there is a little stack of over some here. So after I finish, while the next one is going to prepare, you walk up and get one. But it comes with an obligation. I'm just going to walk down and hand out to here. So say, please, how are you? Please. So, because the only way this is going to work is if you actually make an effort and spread the word. So the reason why I'm here at DLD is show there is actually a relationship between standing with a laser-sintered model, presenting a somewhat rugged business model, and being here 2 years later, having partnered up with major sort of players, mostly in rural Africa, still needing to gain access to America. We have the MoMA shop presenting it in the window. If you go to 54th Street, you'll see a whole window about, access to energy and so on. We were campaigning at the Coachella, what is it called, Coachella. So we were like kind of rock. There we were powered by Absolute. And I don't know whether it was Absolute or Little Sun that was sort of pulling the crowd, but we had an amazing party. And we're like, ooh. So, and it's interesting because if this is about, having access to energy, it's also about taking something which is relatively abstract. So what is energy? How does energy feel? And when is energy not boring? When is the climate discussion not like kind of doom and gloom and boring? It's obviously when we are with Absolute at the Coachella Music Festival. When it's reaching out to youth, making something where the parental segment, I believe it's called, say, oh, I have to get this for my kids. To go out in the garden or in the day, you say, come, let's take some sunlight with us back tonight. And then you read your bedtime story with that child of yours, and you go, do you remember today we went out into the sun? So isn't that funny now? You can sort of take your bedtime story and you can illuminate it. That child, I would argue, is more likely to make an environmentally sane choice later on in life when they have their own house and have to choose what type of energy they're using. So a child is an amazing energy carrier, like a message carrier. And these are the narratives that we're trying to push with this. So I'm going to finish now by asking, go and take the little bit of lamps laying here, if you dare. And I suggest the people in the back run equally fast, approaching faster, and otherwise you'll just have to go to the MoMA store and buy it. Thank you so much, Steffi, for having me, and please help yourself.